Well, hey guys, welcome to Cheers, and we're going to be talking about the most misunderstood thing in Christianity, the church. So how many of you have always heard, hey, invite someone to church, or come to church, or I go to this church? Well, I was growing up, I was always told this little thing, that you do, that this is the church and this is the steeple, and open it up and you see all the people. It was just common for us to use in our vernacular that we are going to church. And that meant that we were going to a building to actually hear a preacher preach and listen to and maybe participate in some songs and singing and see our friends. Well, today we're going to talk about this misunderstood thing because it's really confusing when the Bible tells us that we, the believers, are the church. And even, I've been pastoring for over 35 years, and in our churches, all through, we would tell people from the pulpit, hey guys, the building is not the church. You are the church. But yet we would continue to say, invite your friends to come to church. And it was just this mixed message, almost a little bit confusing, like, trying to figure out a Rubik's Cube, but here, yes, by the way, I did solve that. And back in the 80s, I was really good at it. 35 seconds was my best time. But anyway, I digress. The fact is that it's confusing, and we've made it confusing. So today I want to try to bring a little bit of clarity to what is the church. Now, nothing wrong with the building, but it's just not biblically defined as the church. And so have you ever thought about the embassies? This is just a little bit of way to maybe help you understand the church and the church concept. So an embassy definition, I'll read this to you. An embassy is a group of government officials headed by an ambassador who represent their government in a foreign country. So when we read this definition, the embassy is government officials. It's people headed by an ambassador, another person, who represent their government, which is another group of people in a foreign country. So the embassy, it's like an embassy put out an official statement. Well, we know that buildings don't put out official statements. Who put out the official statement? The people did in the embassy. The leaders in the embassy put out that statement. So look at it this way. America has embassies all over the world and in various countries. An American embassy is a little piece of America within that foreign country. It's where the laws of America rule. So look at this again as a parallel of the church. The church representing an embassy here on earth. So an American embassy is a little piece of America within the foreign country. Now we know that this earth that we're living on is not our homeland. Our homeland is in heaven. Our citizenship is in heaven, right? So we are on foreign territory here. And embassy is where the laws, the American embassy, where the American rules, the laws of America rule. Embassies are sovereign territories that don't belong to the country they are in, but from the country they are from. Think about that. Embassies are sovereign territories that don't belong to the country they are in, but from the country they are from. If you get into trouble in a foreign country, you'll want to enter the gates of the embassy that can help you. So God has an embassy in a foreign land as well, and it's called the church. Now, again, embassy is made up of people, and the same way here, God's embassy, the church, is believers. And we'll get into the definition of that here in a bit. But an embassy is to bring the values of the homeland into that foreign territory. The church is God's embassy to bring the values of our homeland, heaven, into the foreign territory we call earth. This is the main purpose of the church. This world is not our home, but God has set up shop in this land through the church or through the believers. So I'm going to bring up a passage here. Matthew 6, chapter 10 says, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." That means the will or the laws and values from God or from heaven manifesting on earth. And so no natural, we'll just look at it from this side, a natural and a spiritual. So no person or no natural person abroad is completely immune from unexpected and sometimes unfortunate events. So if you find yourself in an emergency or a life-changing event, getting to know your home country's embassy while abroad in the foreign country can help ease some of your worries. Now let's take a look at this. Let's flip it just a little bit and look at it from the spiritual side. No person on earth is completely immune from unexpected and sometimes unfortunate events. So if you find yourself in an emergency or a life-changing event, getting to know your home church can help ease some of your worries. And when I say home church, not the building, but the believers in your vicinity, in your area, in your home, in your gathering. It could be in a building, but we're not talking about a building. Getting to know your home church or your believers that are around you can help ease some of your worries, right? Because we are to bear one another's burdens and help one another, and encourage one another, and strengthen one another. So unfortunately, though, here's a little downside. So Christians have adopted the laws and values of the country they live in above the laws and values of heaven, their homeland. Christians think that the church is a noun, which means a place. They go to church, they attend church, the church has an address, the church is made up of walls, AC units, chairs, tables, coffee machines, stages, lights, 501c3, and a place to invite and listen. And unfortunately, the church has become, in some sense, a powerless religious institution in a foreign land. So this has added chaos and confusion to who we are and what we are to be about. So let's look at the definition of the word church. Now, the church in the Greek is literally called ecclesia, and it's an assembling, a gathering. So the church or the ecclesia is a gathering, an assembling. It's where the whole body of Christians scattered throughout the earth actually are able to come together in smaller pockets, obviously, because we all can't meet. One day we will all be together, but we are gathering together. And that gathering or that assembly is called ecclesia, or the church. So it's not a building, it's not a noun, it's not a place, it's what we do, kind of a verb. It's a gathering together. And the illustration here is the Lord's view of the church in my view. Now, I had a situation where I was like, God, I have got to look at the church in your eyes, but I'm looking at it through my eyes, and that's the only way I can see it. So help me see the church, the real church, in your eyes and through your eyes. And it wasn't long, maybe a week or so. And I had this picture that came into my mind, and it reminded me that the prayer that I had asked. And it was a globe that actually was lit up all over, and all the little lights on there. And the Lord was like, take a look at these lights. And he said, this is how you view the church. And every light represented a church organization, a 501c3 church. And that's the way I looked at it, as individual churches all over the world. Well, then the lights went out on the globe, and they came back on with more lights. And he said, this is the way I see the church. And every single light was a believer. It wasn't an organization. It was an individual believer. And he said, this is my church. There's one church, and I'm the pastor of it. And I was like, So what am I? Am I a pastor? Is like, well, you're an associate pastor, under God, as a steward of what he's given me to shepherd, and that is a group of believers. And so, it was really a different view because I was looking at it from different organizational standpoints. But it makes sense because when we get to heaven, right, there's not going to be the Baptists and the Methodists and the Episcopals and all this stuff, right? We're going to be one church under God. And, and he's going to be the pastor, the shepherd, the good shepherd, and he's going to lead us. And so I had to really change the way I viewed everything because I was looking at it from a segregation standpoint in individualism and silos. And God was saying, no, that's not the way it works. We are the church, and there's one church, and it is made up of all the believers. The first mention of the word church is in Matthew 16. I'll bring this up here on the screen. And it says, and I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I'm going to bring just a few things out of that scripture there. Number one is Peter, right? And the word Peter means Petros. That's a stone or a pebble. Now, it's interesting that he says, you are Peter or a pebble, but on this rock I will build my church. So Peter, the word Petros, means pebble or stone. And then the word rock is actually the Greek word Petra, which is a little different, but it means large rock. So you could say a large rock is a collection or a gathering of smaller rocks or stones or pebbles fused together to form something solid. So metaphorically here, the church is a collection of stones or pebbles that come together to form a stable and solid foundation in which to build on and serve from. We are to be the rock that doesn't move, versus the shifting sand of the waves and the things of the world that are eroding through secular worldviews. We've got to be rock solid or stable. The word ecclesia also means legal or legislative assembly. So just like embassies are legal entities, the church or the gathering of the believers is also a legal gathering under heaven. And so one of the jobs of the church is to legislate or to bring God's viewpoint into the culture. Now, that is exactly what embassies do when they are in foreign countries, that they are to bring the viewpoint of America to that sovereign land which that embassy is operating from. So embassies, listen to this, embassies would no longer be effective if they took on the culture and the laws and the values of the foreign land. It'd be no value. They must stay rock solid, right, in following the will and the values of the homeland. Otherwise, they become ineffective. Now, another thing that Jesus says in here, he says, my church. We got to remember, it's his church, not ours, not mine. It's his church. We are his church. And then he says, the gates of hell. Now, notice that the word gates there is plural. Interesting. More than one. The gates of hell. Gates are where the elders met to legislate. So when you read a lot of the Old Testament scripture, you'll see that a lot of the elders actually met at the gates. And so things were decided there. Of course, I'm sure they're talking shop too, but this is where they met. This is where the leaders met and did some legislation. So in this, with the embassy and the legislation, hell's legislators, the gates of hell's legislators will not prevail against God's legislators, which are you and I. The word gates in this passage is also the Greek word pule and has a reference to a prison. Now, Matthew 16:19, I want to bring this up because this is the next verse there. It says, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Now, who's he going to give the keys to? I'm going to give you, the church, right? You, the believers. He's talking not to a building. He's not going to give keys to a building. He's going to give keys to you of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So here is, again, the keys, which keys is more than one. Notice keys is plural. Same as gates. The gates of hell was plural, and the keys of the kingdom are plural. It's interesting here that it says whatever you bind with a key, because he's talking about keys and then binding and loosing. So I'll give you the keys of the kingdom so you can actually go and bind and loose, and whatever you bind and loose with those keys will be also bound and loosed in heaven, meaning that heaven or the government of heaven will back you because I've given you, or God has given us authority. Remember, keys represent authority. So he's given us keys. We have the authority to open whatever door those keys do. And in this passage, he's saying those keys is what you will bind something with. We all know that keys lock doors or bind up something. You can get somebody bound by actually with a key, locking them in somewhere. But you can also set something free or loose something as well, but you got to have a key to do that. Well, God's given us the keys. He said, I'm giving you the keys of the kingdom so that you can bind things on earth and you can loose things on earth. And whatever you do as the heaven's embassy or heaven's representative, we will back you. Heaven will back you. And that's what he's saying there, that whatever you do on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven, meaning you're going to have heaven's full support and backing on that. So keys represent authority. Keys open things like doors, opportunities, treasure, and prison gates. And keys can close things as well. So keys are important. If you don't have a key to your car, guess what? You're not going anywhere. You got to have a key. A key gets into your house. If you don't have a key to your house and it's locked, you're not getting into your house unless you storm the windows or break them down or bust down the door. But keys were given to the church. What is the church? The gathering together of believers. And we're going to go through a lot in this series. It's going to be a multiple part series on what is the church. But I wanted to bring the definition of ecclesia. That is the word, the Greek word. When you see the word church in the New Testament, that word is ecclesia, meaning the gathering. There was no building that was associated with the word church. So it's just simply a gathering. So if you gather, 2 or 3 of you gather in a cafe, the church is meeting. If you gather in a restaurant with some believers, guess what? The church is meeting. We got to get away from this, that the church is a place where we got to go to, and it's a building and it has an address and it's a noun, it's a place. No, it's not. It's you and me. When we gather, then that's what's called the church. And notice that Jesus never mentioned starting churches. It's interesting. There's nothing in the Bible that tells us to go and start churches. He says, go and make disciples. And of course, the disciples gather. And that gathering is called the church. But it's not our goal is to start churches and then try to get believers into it. That doesn't make sense. No, we go out and we make disciples. And then as those disciples gather, then the church is actually meeting. So, but here's one little thing too. I want to just almost a little side note. Notice I use the word disciples instead of Christians. I looked up the definition of what a Christian is, or the definition of a Christian in Merriam-Webster's, and I looked up the definition of disciple. And I was really shocked by this. The definition for a disciple is one who accepts or believes and assists in spreading the doctrines of Christ. So a disciple of Christ is one who believes and assists in the spreading of the doctrines of Christ. Now, Christian is very different. It's one who professes belief in the teachings of Jesus Christ. That's it. A Christian is someone who believes that the teachings of Christ are right. Doesn't mean they're following them. It just means that they believe that they're right. But even the demons believe and shudder, right, in James chapter 5. So a disciple not only believes, but does the work and promotes the work of Christ and the doctrines of Christ. And you know what? We've got to be disciples. The Bible, the Great Commission, it didn't say go and make Christians. It said go and make disciples. So we're to make disciples, meaning people that can gather to be the church and follow and promote the doctrines and the teachings of Christ. So here's some discussion questions for this part of our series. Number one, what is the church and what is its main purpose? Number two, have you viewed the church from an embassy standpoint, and what does that mean to you? Number three, the church is not supposed to be viewed as a building. All pastors preach that, but why is it that most Christians still don't quite get it? Number four, the church was supposed to be built on a rock, meaning something stable that does not move or wavers. Why do you think culture has infiltrated the church more than the church infiltrating the culture? Number five, it seems like the gates of hell are prevailing against the church. Why do you think that is the case? Number six, what are some of the keys of the kingdom from your perspective? Remember, keys represent authority. And number seven, what do you think about the difference between a Christian and a disciple? Well, I hope that this will stir your discussion today about what is the church. It's actually fairly simple, right? When we look at it from that, we made it complex over the years, but being the church is really, it's the gathering of believers. That is what the church really is. So we're going to get into more of the church concepts and elements and some of the things, and even talk about what a pastor is supposed to do and all that good stuff as we move through this series. But anyway, I hope you have a great discussion today, and we'll see you in the next video. God bless. Well, we hope you've enjoyed that introduction to our discussion today. One of the cool things about Cheers is that we actually have a discussion around the topic. And now I want to invite you to come into our discussion together and participate with us. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can go to cheerschurch.alterlive.com. We'll put the link in the description. If you're already on Altar Live with us watching, then you can just log in to be able to participate. You can turn your camera on or off, your microphone on or off. You can participate as much or as little as you want to. We just want you to enjoy the time together and fellowship together. And we just hope you're blessed by joining us today. So consider joining our discussion, and we'll see you there.